Hello, welcome to another Museum FAQ video. I'm Paul Orselli, President and Chief Instigator at POW here on Long Island, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Andrea Jones. She's rocking a cool Zoom background. I'm not. We had a we had a previous conversation before we recorded why I'm not. Maybe we'll touch on that, but really, we want to talk about other things. And the first thing, Andrea, I always like to talk about or have guests talk about is their backgrounds, because I think it's really interesting to find out sort of how people arrived at where they are now. So maybe you could start us out before our main conversation and talk a little bit about your background.
Mm. I just realized how great my background is for talking about my background.
Okay.
But I knew you'd like that pun. You're very punny. Um, yeah, because I was a teenager in the '80s, and I think that a lot of my ideas about education came from myself being a student, being a disaffected, sort of bored student that didn't understand why we had to be any learning about any of this stuff. Why did we have to learn math? Why did we have to learn science, um, history? I mean, you name it. I was just I did like get enough. I got the grades to go to college and all that, but the whole time I was just kind of playing the game. You know what I mean? So today I am an educator, or an education consultant. I work with museums, but I kind of go beyond school programs and things like that, to kind of big picture thinking, change in museums. And so, how did I get there? Okay, so back to when I was a when I was a disaffected, apathetic student. Um, I kind of fumbled around a lot in my 20s, and then eventually decided that I was going to become a teacher. And I call myself an education avenger because I was going to go back to public school that had wronged me and avenge those wrongs, and try to really make an education environment that was stimulating, experiential, participatory, and above all, relevant to the students. So I taught in high school, two different public school systems in Atlanta for, I think it was 7 years, something like that. Um, and then made a transition to the museum field. I think, I actually started teaching right when No Child Left Behind sort of came to being. And that was a rocky road. I mean, the increased emphasis on testing. I felt like I was educating kids despite the system and not with it. Um, so when I discovered museum education, it was just like, oh, this is what I should have been doing all along. I mean, informal learning is great. You don't have to test the kids. You focus on inspiration and sparking interest, and that's in creative ways to do that. So I think that's where I got into. So I worked at the Atlanta History Center. I redesigned all the school tours there, well, most of the school tours there, to be like role-playing experiences, and kind of like you are in the shoes of this person, sort of experiences with games and different kinds of theater techniques. And then my wife actually got a job in DC at Gallaudet University, and so we moved to DC, and I had to find a job. And I don't know if you know this, Paul, but DC is kind of like, it's kind of like if like you're an actor and you go to Hollywood, like DC is like that for museum people. Yeah, it's like there's so many jobs, but it's so competitive. It's like cutthroat. Yeah, so it took me a little while to find a job here, but I got a job at this place called Akakeek Foundation, which was an outdoor colonial farm and agriculture education site. And then I went out on my own. So I think you got it. That's pretty much the story of me.
Man, so the Avenger finds her way to Washington, D.C., sort of museums, Hollywood. That's funny you say that because when my father was alive and when I was starting out in the museum business, he would always ask me, "Do you think you'll ever get a job at the Smithsonian?" And I was like, no, you never can tell because, to a lot of people, that's the epitome of
The Holy Grail.
museum work. That's right.
Yeah.
So, well, that's a good background story. That may well inform the twists and turns of our conversation, which I thought it would be a great idea to talk about. Um, Not quite the future of museums, but how museums think about themselves and how we might change how we think about ourselves. And now we have this tremendous confluence of events happening in and around the world, and obviously museums are impacted by it in different ways. And so, one idea that I know we've touched on briefly that I'd be interested in hearing you talk about is, how do we remove the fixation on the physical museum building and the collections? Like, those are important, but is there something that could inform our thinking both right this very minute and longer term that sort of turns the idea of museums inside out and thinks as much about what could be happening with museums outside their building or beyond their building or in addition to their building and collections to really have more direct impacts on the communities that they serve. So that's a massive meatball that I just threw your way, but you are up to the task since you're an Avenger. So
I
that's
mean,
like that's like the evil
I am an
nuclear
Avenger.
meatball just came to you, and so now you are going to, with your
Pew, 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 pew.
superpowers, uh, slice it apart for us, or at least find a
Yeah.
place to start in that sort of messy, sort of Paul Orselli type question.
Yeah. Paul Orselli wants to know, what is a museum? Go. I mean, Paul, like, we are talking during a time of, I mean, the world is on fire. We have a pandemic going on. We have a revolution, protests happening all over the place. And museums are closed.
Economic crisis.
We have an economic crisis.
Organizations closed.
We have the downfall of petroleum oil. We have, questions about the purpose of education. We have an uncovering. I mean, this is something I've written about too. Is the word apocalypse? It comes from two Greek words that really mean uncover, and that is what's happened, right? We're now seeing everything from, what food workers really go through. What does it mean to be essential, an essential worker? What are our kids like? What does a classroom instruction look like? Oh, well, you can see it on Zoom now. What your teacher is like? I mean, everything is just really. And then when people's feet are put to the fire, when museums are put in the place to respond, and who responds and who doesn't, you're also seeing that. You're seeing a lot of uncovering. So, what is a museum is one of those things that we have to ask, and it's up for grabs right now. We're really having to grapple with it. We, and I've written about this too. I think we're going through a period of a huge transition, where we had to let go of well, some of us still haven't let go, let's be honest, of our previous identity as museums, as a place where people go and gather and stay for a long time, and all those kinds of things. A place where the collection is everything. Now, we're in this crisis mode, and for a long time no one's been able to go into a museum. So what is a museum if a visitor isn't going to it? That's an identity crisis right there. Just like any person has an identity crisis. I've had them. I'm sure you've had them. You don't have to get into it right now if you don't want. Um, but if you leave a job, that's a huge transition. Like, who am I if I'm not part of this organization? Or if you leave a relationship, um, who am I if I'm not with this person that I've been with and established who I am, in relation to this person? Now that I'm not with this person, who am I? And I think museums are going through the same thing. But I think that they are, I think by and large, clinging to the old normal.
So there's a little bit of a problem, isn't it?
I didn't even answer your question at
That's all
all.
right. That's yeah. I think it's interesting what you said, but it leads maybe need. This is a conversation, so it's not an interview or
Hmm.
presentation either. But I think the idea, not just in museums, this sort of vain hope that somehow we can go back to the way things were, as if the way things were was perfect before all this problem started, which I don't
Right.
think it was. Um, it might be an interesting tack uh, rather than to have Andrea and Paul sort of philosophize about the general aspects of museums. It'd be interesting, I think, rather than one thing I've tried to do is rather than just constantly listen to the drumbeat of doom
Yeah.
about museums and people losing their jobs, and museums forecast certain percentage, which seems to keep changing, that may never open again, which those are all deeply concerning. And certainly when you're talking about people losing their jobs, it's very concerning and serious. But I'm wondering if you might, since you are tapped into the museum world in a good way, if there are sort of examples that you see. You mentioned just a minute ago, well, how are people reacting? How are organizations reacting at this time? I think sort of seeing how certain organizations are responding in nimble ways or creative ways or innovative ways, however you want to frame it, might be a positive sort of set of examples that provide some uh, positive ways to think about this sort of transition. So I don't know if there are either specific examples or general
Yeah.
examples of approaches that you think there are institutions or individuals within the museum world right now who you're like, I want to keep an eye on that
Yeah.
museum or that person, because if they're doing that now, it will be really interesting to see what they do in sort of the next phase of things.
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely keep my eye out for positive examples. I have a Pinterest just for that. Um, but actually, I think can I just rant just a little bit before we get positive,
This is
Paul?
your conversation. I've invited you, so rant away.
Yeah, I mean, because so here's the deal. Like, everybody right now is obsessed with opening, right? Opening the museum. Meanwhile, there are so many needs out there for people. People are experiencing all the shocks that have resulted from the pandemic. They are dealing with racial injustice. They are wondering, they're confused, they are out of work. Um, I mean, they have all kinds of needs. And we're just worried about how we're going to sanitize everything and keep the wayfinding clear. I mean, can we not open the museums? Can we go out into the community and work on making connections and helping people through this time in whatever way we can? I mean, we have, for those museums that still have resources, and I realize that, everybody's struggling right now financially. but I think it would give us all a sense of purpose too. I mean, to wake up in the morning and go, yeah, I'm going to go help people today. I'm going to hand out water at the protest, with my museum shirt, from my institution, or I'm going to open my lobby to protesters, or do like, and I'm going to insert a positive example here for you, Paul. Um, I'm going to, be a COVID testing site like the Baltimore Museum of Industry, who donated their parking lot and partnered with a hospital to do that, or I love the example that there's an artist, Roosevelt Watson and Shawana Brooks in Jacksonville, Florida, came up. Have you heard about the 6 Feet Away Museum? It's somebody's yard. So there's a curator and an artist who are partners. They're living together, and Roosevelt Watson is the guy, and he's an artist, and he does these sort of sculptural pieces about race in America. And he kind of created this outdoor sculpture piece, and they just opened their yard to people to come check it out, and they called it. And Shawana Brooks is a curator, and they weren't acting on behalf of any organization, because, of course, a museum this would take a year to put together if you're a museum. It would be like, it would look like this. It would look like a project management sheet, with like 18 different, timelines.
We can't just put this artist's installation in somebody's backyard. We need
No. I mean, they just did it, right? And it actually ended up being so healing for people, because the neighbors would walk by and they would talk about race. They are having conversations because art is the catalyst for doing that. I mean, hello, museums know this stuff, right? But we're not really going outside the walls. And I think all of this focus on, how are we going to like create the perfect gestured, interactive, is making us more inward focused. It's like, I just want to be like, like, this moment is not about you. It's about them out there. It's about all the ways that you can be relevant to this moment right now. And I think especially with exhibit development, which probably will be the majority of your viewers, I'm guessing. Don't know. I like how you're on mute, so it looks like you're a mime.
Paul the mime.
No,
I think even though my sort of end of the museum business is more directed towards exhibits, it seems like there's a pretty fair representation of different types of museum and cultural arts workers, non-museum people, who have been viewing the videos. So
that's good.
You have you have a wide audience, so you have a big stage and a big megaphone here, so use it to your advantage.
Well, I mean, generally though, I think there's, as there's a siloization. The exhibit people over here, programs people over here, and a lot of exhibit people are thinking, and I don't want to put words in people's mouth, but some people are thinking, oh, that's for programs to be like responding in the now, right? What we do, we're just going to hunker down and plan our exhibits for when all this pandemic is over with. So we're just going to keep on, right? Meanwhile, the world is changing around us. So whatever you plan right now could look completely out of date by the time, whatever happens. Number two, people need us now. And whatever you're investing in your museum, meaning time, money, resources, people, right? That's what you're saying your museum thinks is important, right? So
show me the money. That's how I know what you think is important. Show me the budget sheet.
So these exhibits that we're planning for, like, whenever the pandemic is over, these people, these resources could be creating pop-ups, could be creating different ways. I mean, what's happening when you open your lobby are you just opening your lobby, or could people like see something when they, could exhibit designers use their talents and skills to design for public spaces, or to design for, drive-through experiences, or, because not only is that where the people are, but historically museums have been elitist and thought of as not for everyone. There are a lot of people that don't feel comfortable in museums, and here's our chance to actually like break down, like, for once we're not allowed to go in the building, and we should be pushed out, and to the point where we're in the communities, but we're still going like, okay, hold on, we're gonna like really focus on opening, so forget about it, right?
So why? What do you think the problem is? What's the disconnect? What are people afraid of?
That is a good question, Paul. What do you think people are afraid of?
I think at least part of it goes back to that idea of wanting to go back to the way
Comfort.
things were. The comfort, exactly.
Yeah.
People, I mean, I think, and not just, to be fair, not just to museum people, people maybe wish that the video could rewind to the beginning of the year, and how could it how could we do something different, so on and so on. I mean, I think there is that comfort. I mean, I've spoken with other people, and we talk about this balance between comfort on one hand, but the need for flexibility and sort of creativity on the
Yeah.
other hand. I mean, both of those are strong human needs,
Yeah.
I think, and institutional needs. And how to find that balance
Yeah.
is not easy. I mean, it is interesting though, even now, when some museums have been given the green light officially to open or reopen, they are choosing not to. And so, it begs the question that you're asking again. Here they are all dressed up with no place to go. What could they be doing with their staff, with their existing resources, to fulfill the needs of
Mm-hmm.
the communities around them? I mean, I'll just offer a positive example that I thought was really interesting. Museum in the UK, I believe, that sort of repurposed their, it didn't seem like a very big gift shop, and put in things that people could buy that they,
Oh,
that were
yeah. This is in the
things they
UK, right?
needed. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's like it
Yeah.
wasn't like they were reopening, but they acknowledged a need that they could help people nearby to their museum with. And so, if part of the role of museums is to fulfill needs of the communities and the people nearest to them, let's say that, how could they do that? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing, now just push back the question toward you. I think there are lots of museums. Well, I think there are a certain number of museums, and a certain number of museum people are like, what do you mean open the lobby to protesters? Like, that's not, like, we're supposed to be neutral or politically
Oh,
neutral,
right.
which is always a nice thing to say, which
I
is
mean,
not true.
sure. Just
Which is
like
not
live in a
true.
fantasy world there.
Right. I mean,
Uh-huh.
and let me complete the hashtag. Museums are not neutral for you again. But
Yeah.
the thing is, here you have, for example, in New York City, big protest marches marching directly down Fifth Avenue, down Museum Mile, past these, the usual suspects, museum institutions. And, do those museums feel compelled not least of which to open their lobbies or not, but to even show some sort of recognition of what is happening right outside their
Yeah.
buildings.
I mean, I think if museums started to think of this as like an emergency situation, like we were in a war, you know, would you be focused on teaching people about, Hudson River School artists, or would you like go out and like, offer whatever resources you had to help people, and I don't mean necessarily that it's always like a physical need, like, testing or water or something like that, but people have emotional needs. They need to talk. I love this program. Lincoln's Cottage, President Lincoln's Cottage in DC here did a program, and I'm forgetting the name of it now, but it was about connectedness. It was about oneness and finding commonalities with people. And you would think, okay, like what's the connection to Lincoln? Oh wait, here, look. What's the connection to Lincoln? Are you going to teach people about Lincoln? And it really only had a very tangential, I mean, it was mission related because Lincoln did a lot of, bridging of different people and contemplation of, oneness, when he was at the cottage. But it wasn't there to teach people about the facts of Lincoln. It was the whole purpose of it was to bring people together to have a chance to talk. And these are all, the thing that they all had in common was we all like Lincoln. We like Lincoln, and we also need a chance to talk to people that are not our family for just a few, right? Or a stranger can offer a really interesting point of view. I don't know, but I think that museums are really too narrowly focused on their missions, so that could be another problem. But I think what you said is really true, that change is hard and that comfort is really important to people, and I don't blame them, right? It's hard. And when you're going through a transition and you don't know who you are as a museum, the easiest thing to do is to fall back on what you know. But it is not supposed to be easy. Like when you are going through an identity transition, you're supposed to feel uncertain, and that doesn't feel good all the time. But it can also feel really exciting. It's like, I mean, I remember when I came out of the closet, Paul, just to get personal here. When I left, so I was married to a man, and when I left him, I thought, well, I know I'm not straight, but I really don't know much more than that. I don't know how to be gay. I don't know how to be in this world. I don't know who I am. Do I dress the same? Like, do I have the same friends? Like, I just really, right? And that feels really uncomfortable. At the same time, it felt like the world was a lot, like I felt like a teenager again. Like it felt like I had just, I was free and like to really be the me that I had hoped, that I was trying to be, I guess, when I was like 10, right? So I think museums, if they really took a stock of like, who do we really want to be in our ideal world? We know that we have a problem with elitism. We know we have these like all white, wealthy boards that are keeping us from doing things. We know that people of color don't find us to be relevant in the things that we're like. You could reinvent yourself. Like now is the time. Experiment.
So
I just got a really high voice there because it was like.
No, that's all right. No, that's good. This is a real conversation. This is not a canned, speech. I always like to, when I'm teaching a class or giving a workshop or working with people, creative partners, I think it's always important for people to have a couple of actionable takeaways from the conversation, because otherwise it's it's sort of like going to a fireworks show. Wow, that was cool. And then you leave, it's not like everybody leaves the great big fireworks show and says, well, I'm going to go into my garage tomorrow and start making some of my own fireworks. I mean, maybe there are some people who do that, but probably not most of the people who go to a fireworks show. So I'm just wondering, you know, if you were talking to a consulting client or a museum, even if you're not working with them, but a museum whose people you know you like and respect and who you want to succeed, what are a couple of things that you might say to them? You know, like a straw, even a straw to grasp onto to help maybe help guide their thinking or help help them think about, okay, this is something, this might be something small, but this is something I could think about and really think about my work and my place in the museum world to help museums, my particular museum, myself as museum worker, go the next step in this next phase of
Mm-hmm.
things.
Um, I guess I think that the biggest question is, instead of trying to get people to come to the museum, you need to figure out how the museum can get to them. You know, there's too much focus on getting people back into the museum. Not to mention it might be unethical to like bring people into a place where they could catch a disease, and that their workers could catch a disease, and that their older volunteers could be infected with one of the most deadly viruses on the planet. But let's just leave that as an aside.
I'm glad you're giving people something positive to grasp on there. That's
okay,
good.
but no. Okay, so think of ways.
Boy, did I ask the wrong question.
You told me I could go on tangents, Paul. No, but I think asking how the museum can get to the people instead of the other way around. And then also how to interpret your mission more broadly. You know, just like the Lincoln example. Um, think about what our community needs, and then to understand community needs, you need to listen. That's probably the third thing. Listen. And if you don't know the mechanics of listening, then do some research, or hire a consultant, or whatever, right? But like figure out, and it's not just surveys, but it's reading, and it's um, reaching out to like people that you don't normally reach out to understand what's going on out there, and then marrying your, kind of doing that Venn diagram of looking at what is your mission, and then what do people need, and figuring out where those overlap. And it may be a lot less content oriented than you think right now.
So I'm going to take those as three great takeaways. How to bring the museum to people instead of worrying about bringing people to museums. To think more broadly about really the aims of your mission and how that can be implemented. And then last but certainly not least, to listen.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry, one more thing too. As far as like designers, exhibit designers, these people have amazing talents, right? They are creative. And if they could think of not having the museum building as a design constraint, that kind of, creative constraints are great for creativity to spur new ideas. And if you just thought, like, what if we could never have a building again? What would we do? How would we, like, let's not be like typewriter repair people who are now irrelevant in like a continuing world. Like, translate your talent, because everybody is so, we have such talent out there in the field that can be really utilized to make a difference right now.
I agree with you. Constraints are a great spur to creativity. You listen and read things like Charles and Ray Eames and all sorts of creative designers and creative people talk about these constraints as actually being a spur to their creativity, which is good. So I'm going to really latch on to that point about bringing the museum, thinking about not just bringing people to the museum, but bringing museum to the people. What could that mean? Because that's a in some ways a constraint, but in some ways it's a real neat flip from maybe a lot of thinking that's going on right now.
Yes. And one last,
Oh, okay. I like how you prepared visual aids. That tells
hey,
me that you were really thinking about this conversation, which
this
I
is
appreciate.
low, this is low tech. This is also actually the point. It doesn't have to be fancy. You just have to respond. You know, I mean, just show people that you're there and you're not just waiting it out.
Well, Andrea, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I dare say that viewers might not have found a more far-flung museum-related conversation on YouTube. They got their money's worth, every penny that they paid. But I think maybe that really it was the whole point of this conversation. You know, the everything we spoke about did relate to to museums and serving visitors and serving our communities and really thinking about the ways to engage with people. So
It's
I
all
really
connected, Paul.
it is. I mean, we didn't even begin to touch on something you didn't mention in your biography, that you are actually a person who has met the Dalai Lama, and that gives people an incentive. We'll put resources. Now
Yeah.
I'm working on YouTube. We'll put resources down below, and this will give you an incentive. We'll certainly include ways that people can find out more information about you and your work, because you just gave us the thumbnail version there of your background, and I think people uh, after this video, they will either immediately run away from the opportunity to work with either one of us, or they will run towards the opportunity to work with either
I
one of
mean,
us or both of us. Hey, that would be awesome.
go big or go home, Paul. I mean,
That's right. So thanks so much, Andrea. I really appreciate you taking the time.
thank you so much, Paul. This was great, and I'm glad that you keep on doing these videos.